Welcome artists, we are going to do our eyes today, and how we're going to start that is by dividing our paper in half. So if you have an 8.5 by 11 sketchbook, you are going to divide it at 5.5 by making a mark on both sides of your sketchbook, and then lightly and carefully connecting those dots. And then after that, what you're going to do is you're going to divide the top half of your paper in half. So if you have 8.5 by 11, that's 4.25. And you make two lines and connect them. So then you have two even spaces at the top. And I know mine don't look even, but that's because of the spiral binding makes it look wider on the left side than it does on the right. So, all right, so I'm going to walk you through this step by step. You start by drawing a horizontal line across your paper. Horizontal just means from left to right. And then you draw a half of like a football shape or an almond shape for the top part of the eye. And then you drop below on the side with your tear duct. And you kind of curve that around. That's your tear duct right there, which is where you cry from when you're sad. And so then you just gently bring that around, and you leave a little bit of overhang on the other side because that's like where your eyelashes and your eyelid, you need to leave a little bit of a overlap there. And then you're going to draw your iris, which is the colored part of your eye. You want to cut off the top part of the eye. It's a perfect circle. You can even let it go above a little bit just so you can get that circle if that helps you, and then you'll go back and erase that top part of the line. But you want to have, if you leave the whole circle of your iris in there, it makes you look really surprised or afraid. So we don't want to do that with this drawing. You may want to do that, but at some point, but not with this drawing. So then I put a point in the center of the iris, and then I'm drawing a smaller circle around in the inside for the pupil, and then I'm leaving a space. What I'm drawing now is the highlights of the eyes. Your eyes are glossy, they reflect any kind of light. The shape of your highlights in your eyes are going to depend most times on what's reflecting. If it's a square light like we would have in a classroom, then the highlights are going to have this odd squarish shape like the ones I drew. And then you put this line right here is kind of where your eye folds when you open your eyelid. It's very different for everyone. And I'm just going in and erasing that horizontal line I used as a guide. That's my daughter screaming. So now we have a nice outline of our eye. This is as far as we've gotten so far. Now we're going to put some eyelashes on. Now eyelashes radiate around the center of the eye. So what that means is as you get farther to the right, they're bending towards the right. But as you get up and go upwards, you can see how mine are starting to go more upwards instead of outwards. And then they'll wrap around and they'll start to turn the other way. Because that's, if you look at your eyelashes in the mirror, they don't, a lot of times when we draw them to where they're all kind of bent one way, and that's not realistic. That's not how people's eyelashes grow out of their eyes. They radiate around the pupil of the eye, if you wanted to use that for a ground point. And then the bottom eyelashes are a little, there's a space in between that line. Remember when you draw eyelashes that they overlap and they crisscross and they're very random. You don't want to make these perfect eyelashes that are all parallel and right, nice and neat, because people's eyelashes don't look like that naturally. You have a little less eyelashes on the bottom of your eye as opposed to the top. And so I'm just going to go back and darken some of my lines. just so you can see them nice and clearly. So this is the basic structure of the eye without any shading. Just add a few eyelashes. So this is basically your first step here. You don't have to do any of the shading parts. You're just drawing the outline just to get a feel for how to do this. So I'm going to move on to the second eyelash that you have to do, and I'll speed up the camera here. Okay, so you can see how I'm starting by drawing that horizontal line. I drew it diagonally a little bit, and that's for variation. Some people's, not everyone's eyes are, the two left and right points are completely horizontal. Some folks have eyes that are slightly slanted. My beautiful wife's eyes actually slant kind of the other way than when I'm drawing this. They have a slight downward slant on the outside, so that is how you account for variations, is by using that horizontal line at the beginning. So that's what I'm doing here, is making them a little sideways. And so now I'm just quickly, we're camera sped up, and I'm just going through those first steps again with eyelashes and getting all the outlines down. You can also make yours slightly different on the second one. You have that freedom. And so I'm going to start now. The camera's going to slow back down. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing radial lines that run from the center of the pupil. And what I'm going to do, I'm just drawing those lightly, and those help me with my shading of the iris to keep the shading in a radial pattern, which means radial means it goes around a center point. So you can see how that's what I'm doing. I'm starting out my shading on the iris with just some lines radiating outwards. And okay, we're going to speed up here in just a second. But I'm just going around the inside of my iris. You notice that I'm leaving the pupil white for now. I'm going to save that for the last step. Now I'm going around the outside of my iris with those somewhat uneven radial lines. And then I take a tissue and I soften them up. And what this does is it gives me the mid-tone inside my eyes. And then I'm going to go back and do some touch-ups. Around the outside of your iris is usually darker than in the middle. There's usually kind of a line. Unless you have really dark eyes, you're going to notice this. Even if you have lighter brown eyes, it's usually going to be a darker line around the inside and the outside of your iris. So I'm just darkening those up and then going back and adding some of those radial lines. Now everybody's eyes are going to be a little bit different there, so you're going to have to look carefully at the person's eyes you're drawing. Now I'm adding some shading above that crease in my eye and below. And what this does is it gives depth. It really makes that crease look like it goes inwards, and that as it comes away from that crease, it goes outwards. And again, taking a tissue, softening it up. Now adding some shadow under the top part of my eye, adding the tear duct, just slightly shading, and your eyelid actually creates a bit of a shadow right onto your eye, so it'll be lightly gray, a little darker where your iris is. Again, using the tissue to soften it, making it look natural. The corners of your eye also need to be a little shaded. They go back in space. Remember, your eyeball is actually a sphere, so it's not this flat thing. You should be able to show that there's some roundness to your eye. And so I'm adding that shading in around the eye. And this eye, I'm not looking at anything. This is just a general structure for an eye. This is not an actual person's eye, but you can see that it looks realistic enough to make it be someone's eye in real life. And so I'm adding some shading under the eye. Again, this gives it depth, feeling. You don't have to go real far out from the eye with your shading, but just so that it doesn't look like it's floating. And just going back and adding some highlights to that bottom eyelid. The top of your bottom eyelid is actually straight up so it catches the light. And now I'm going in and shading that pupil in as dark as I can, as even as I can. It's a satisfying last step. Although I do take the final step of drawing the eyelash. Remember from our monochromatic animals and texture that when you create hair, you just simulate that really well by drawing short lines that are randomly overlapping, and it looks like hair. Just some final touch-ups. Don't be afraid of the dark values, guys. Experiment with those. Okay, so now I've drawn a line straight across for my final sets of eyes, and what I'm doing is I'm mapping out the width of my eyes, and the way that you can do that is, for most people, the space in between your eyes is equal to the width of one of your eyes. It's not a perfect rule. Some people have a narrower gap, some people have a wider gap, but you're going to have to figure that out from whichever set of the guardian's eyes you're drawing. Now, you can see that I've turned that horizontal line, the one for the specific eyeballs, I have turned it a little, I've slanted it, because if you look at Dave Bautista's eyes, they are slanted downwards towards his nose. And so I've made that adjustment. He has super long tear ducts. Never, when I sat down to draw this, I've never seen anybody with tear ducts that look quite like his. But that's where it's important that we draw what we see and not what we think. So if I would have drawn what I thought it should look like, his tear ducts would have been like the ones I drew in the example. But because I was carefully looking, I'm noticing these really odd long tear ducts. And this is the line above the eye. You can see how oddly shaped that is. It's not anything like the ones we did, but there is a definite fold of skin in the tops of his eyes. And you can see I'm working back and forth. I'm not doing one eye at a time. And the reason that I'm doing that is because it helps me to keep symmetry between the two eyes. It's very difficult to draw two eyes the same way. And one of the ways that we can help ourselves in doing that is by drawing them kind of both at the same time rather than one at a time. Because if I finish one, then it's really intimidating to go and then start the second one. Because if I do really well, then I'm going to feel all this pressure to do really well on the second one, and more than likely I'm going to mess it up. But if I kind of do them step by step together, then they kind of progress at the same rate. It helps with the shading. It keeps us from creating illusions with the shading that messes us up. You can see that his irises actually, you can't even see the bottom of his irises because his eyes are so squinty. So I'm just carefully looking at that. You can see how I'm building up the value in his irises. I'm not just shading it, I'm adding lines, I'm adding shading, different values. He doesn't have a whole lot of eyelashes that you can see, and if he does, they're really, really thick and short, so they just kind of look like shading there. And now I'm going and adding some of his eyelashes on his bottom of his eye. And he's got lots of interesting wrinkles and puffiness under his eyes and whatnot. So this is the part of the drawing where you really have to be looking at what you're drawing. You have to look at the person you're drawing. You can't just blindly go by the step-by-steps. You use the step-by-steps and you apply how they work, but it's just a principle. It's not everyone's eyes look like this, because everyone's eyes look different. So I'm beginning to add some shading now around his eyes, and I'll just keep going back and forth as I do this. I'm giving myself some guidelines to where these creases are and puffiness around his eyes. So I'm not going to keep talking. I'll let you guys finish watching this, and you can see how I continue to go back and forth. That's really important when you're drawing a set of eyes. I can't stress enough to you guys, don't draw one eye at a time. Draw them both at the same time, and it will really help you get them both right. So enjoy. I look forward to seeing you guys' eyes. I apologize that the video wasn't initially uploaded right, but it has been fixed, and so now you can see what's going on. All right, guys, enjoy.